The shackles bit into Zara Kenyatta's wrists as the transport van rolled past the sign Riverside Maximum Security Penitentiary. Something was catastrophically wrong. Riverside was the most dangerous male prison in the country. She wasn't supposed to be here. In fact, she wasn't supposed to be going to prison at all. Someone had set her up. Someone was trying to get her killed. But what the corrupt officials who had orchestrated her conviction couldn't foresee was the cold, tactical assessment happening behind her steady gaze as hundreds of violent male inmates sized up their new prey through barred windows. They thought that she would go down easy. They were wrong. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The shackles bit into Zara Kenyatta's wrists as the transport van bounced over another pothole. Through the reinforced window, she watched farmland blur past. Miles of corn and soybean fields that meant they were heading north, not south, toward the women's facility in Millbrook. She'd memorized the transport route during her 3 sleepless nights in county lockup. This wasn't it. "Driver," she called through the partition. "We missed the turnoff about 20 mi back." The guard riding shotgun turned around, his face a mask of bureaucratic indifference. "You'll get where you're going, inmate. Sit back and shut up." Zara pressed her lips together, forcing down the surge of military authority that wanted to bark orders. That woman, Staff Sergeant Kenyatta, was buried under layers of civilian identity for good reason. Here she was just another convicted felon in an orange jumpsuit. The arrest still felt surreal. One moment she'd been reaching for milk in the grocery store cooler. The next, she was face down on linoleum with a knee in her back. "Zara Kenyatta, you're under arrest for armed robbery and conspiracy." The detective's voice had been matter-of-fact, like he was reading a shopping list. "There's been a mistake," she'd said, tasting blood from where her lip had split against the floor. Around her, other shoppers stood frozen, phones out, recording her humiliation. "Tell it to your lawyer." Her lawyer, David Steinberg, had been everything she'd hoped for when she'd scraped together the retainer fee. 30 years of criminal defense experience, a reputation for thorough preparation, a track record of winning impossible cases. He'd spent hours going over her alibi, tracking down witnesses, challenging every piece of evidence. "This case is garbage," he'd told her during one of their meetings. "The timeline doesn't work. The witness identification is questionable at best, and they have no physical evidence linking you to the scene. So why do I feel like I'm fighting uphill?" Steinberg had rubbed his temples, looking older than his 60 years. "Because District Attorney Brennan's running for re-election. He needs high-profile convictions, and bank robbery plays well in the media. He's throwing everything at this case. But even Steinberg's skill couldn't overcome a system that seemed determined to convict her. Key witnesses had been intimidated into changing their stories. Security footage from her actual location that morning had mysteriously disappeared from the coffee shop's servers. The judge had ruled against every motion, dismissed every objection. "I've been practicing law for 3 decades, Steinberg had said after the verdict, his voice hollow with disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this. It's like they had the outcome decided before we walked into that courtroom." Judge Holmes had looked uncomfortable throughout the proceedings, avoiding eye contact when she'd pronounced the sentence. 10 years minimum security facility, eligible for parole in 7. Minimum security. That was supposed to mean educational programs, job training, a path back to civilian life. The kind of place where a woman could serve her time without having to fight for survival every day. So why was this transport van heading toward the industrial sprawl visible on the horizon? Why were those guard towers and razor wire coming into view? The van slowed as they approached a checkpoint. Through the front windshield, Zara could see the sign. Riverside Maximum Security Penitentiary. Authorized personnel only. Her blood went cold. "This is wrong," she said, leaning forward. "I'm supposed to go to Millbrook Women's Correctional." The guard didn't even turn around. "Computer says different." The van rolled through the gates, past guard towers, where armed officers tracked their movement. Inside, Zara's mind shifted into tactical assessment mode, a skill drilled into her through countless dangerous operations. High walls, multiple perimeters, maximum security protocols. This was a place designed to hold the most violent criminals in the state, all men. The van stopped in a concrete courtyard surrounded by brick buildings that looked like they'd been built in the 1960s and never updated. Gray, institutional, designed to crush the human spirit. Other inmates in orange jumpsuits moved through the yard in loose groups, their eyes automatically tracking the new arrival. The transport door opened and a corrections officer appeared, a thick-set man with sergeant stripes and dead eyes. "Kenyatta, let's go. Processing waits for no one." "There's been a mistake," Zara said as she climbed out, her shackles making the movement awkward. "I'm supposed to be at a women's facility." The sergeant looked at his clipboard. "Say here, you're classified as male housing. Don't know what to tell you. Maybe you can sort it out with the warden after you're processed." "That's impossible. There's been some kind of clerical error." "Lady, I don't make the rules. I just follow the paperwork. And this paperwork says you belong here." As they walked toward the intake building, Zara caught glimpses of inmates watching from barred windows. Some looked curious, others predatory. All of them male. All of them sizing up the new arrival with the calculating stare of men who'd learned to identify weakness and exploit it. 15 years of classified operations had taught her to read dangerous situations. Her instincts, honed by combat deployments and covert missions, were screaming that this was a setup. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to put her in the most dangerous place possible. The question was who and why. But first, she had to survive long enough to find out. The intake process at Riverside felt like being fed through a meat grinder. Strip search, delsing shower, medical examination by a nurse who barely looked up from her clipboard. Through it all, Zara maintained the thousand-y stare she'd perfected during military processing, giving nothing away while her mind cataloged every detail. "Any medical conditions we should know about?" the nurse asked, finally making eye contact. "No medications?" "No." "History of violence?" Zara paused for a fraction of a second. 15 years of classified kills. But that wasn't what they were asking about. No. The intake officer, a wiry man named Rodriguez, seemed genuinely confused as he processed her paperwork. "This is unusual," he muttered, squinting at his computer screen. Classification says male housing, but he looked up at Zara, then back at the screen. "You got some kind of gender identity situation going on?" "I'm a woman. There's been a mistake." Rodriguez shrugged. "Above my pay grade. Warden Keir will sort it out tomorrow. For now, you're going to Block C general population." "General population?" Zara's voice stayed level, but internally, alarms were screaming. "Shouldn't I be in protective custody until this gets resolved? Computer says Gen Pop. Computer's the boss." Across town, Vincent Caruso poured himself 3 fingers of scotch in his downtown office, the city lights twinkling below like stars. The defense contractor had built his empire on government connections and strategic patience. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. His phone buzzed with a text. Package delivered. Perfect. After 3 years of planning, Zara Kenyatta was exactly where he wanted her. The woman who cost him $40 million in Defense Department contracts was now trapped in the most violent prison in the state, surrounded by predators who'd been told she was a snitch. Caruso had learned patience from watching his enemies. When Staff Sergeant Kenyatta had exposed his company's fraudulent billing in Afghanistan, she'd thought she was serving justice. What she'd actually done was destroy his retirement plan and his daughter's trust fund. The Pentagon investigation that followed had blacklisted his company from future contracts. But Vincent Caruso was a patient man. He'd waited until she retired, until she was vulnerable. A few phone calls to the right people, some strategic campaign contributions, and suddenly Zara Kenyatta was facing charges that would stick no matter how innocent she was. The beauty of it was the plausible deniability. If anyone asked, it was just bureaucratic incompetence that had sent her to the wrong facility. Computer glitches happened all the time. His phone rang. District Attorney Brennan. "It's done," Brennan said without preamble. "She's been processed into Riverside. Any complications?" The intake officer seemed confused about the housing assignment, but he followed protocol. "She's in general population as requested." Caruso smiled. "And the communication restrictions standard for high-profile cases. No phone calls for the first week. Mail is delayed for security screening. Her lawyer won't even know where she is until the paperwork filters through the system." "Excellent. What about our friends inside? The guard you requested has been briefed. Word will spread that she's a federal informant by tomorrow morning." Caruso hung up and raised his glass in a silent toast. Justice, he'd learned long ago, was just another commodity to be bought and sold. Tonight, he'd finally gotten his money's worth. Back at Riverside, Zara followed Rodriguez through a maze of corridors that reek of disinfectant and despair. The walls were painted institutional green, broken only by steel doors with small windows that revealed glimpses of cells beyond. "Chow's at 6, lights out at 10 o'clock," Rodriguez explained as they walked. "You'll get your work assignment tomorrow. Try to stay out of trouble." They stopped at cell 47. Through the reinforced glass, Zara could see her new home. 2 bunks, a small desk, a toilet with no seat. Her cellmate was a mountain of a man covered in tattoos, including several she recognized as white supremacist symbols. "This can't be right," she said. Rodriguez was already walking away. "Welcome to Riverside, Kenyatta. Hope you like your new roommate." The cell door slid open with an electronic buzz. Inside, her cellmate looked up from where he'd been doing push-ups. His eyes traveled up and down her body with undisguised hunger. "Well, well," he said, his voice like gravel. "Christmas came early this year." Zara stepped inside, her military training automatically assessing threats and escape routes. The door slid shut behind her with a finality that echoed through her bones. She was trapped in a cage with a predator, surrounded by hundreds more in a system designed to break her. But Vincent Caruso had made one crucial mistake in his careful planning. He'd assumed that 15 years of military service had made her soft, that retirement had dulled her edge. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Zara's cellmate circled her like a shark scenting blood. "Name's Briggs," he said, flexing muscles that strained against his prison uniform. "Been here 8 years for what I did to the last woman who crossed me." "Noted," Zara replied, claiming the bottom bunk with deliberate calm. She'd faced down Taliban fighters and cartel assassins. She wouldn't be intimidated by a racist with anger issues. "You got some mouth on you." Briggs stepped closer, his breath reeking of cigarettes and something worse. "Going to be fun breaking you in." Zara looked up at him with the same expression she'd used on fresh recruits who thought they were tough. "I sleep light, and I wake up fast. Touch me while I'm sleeping, and you'll wake up in the infirmary." For a moment, something flickered in Briggs's eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even recognition that this wasn't going to be as easy as he'd thought. Then his face hardened again. "We'll see about that, Princess." The first night passed without incident, but Zara didn't sleep. She lay on the thin mattress, listening to the sounds of the prison, distant conversations, the clang of metal doors, occasional shouts that might have been fights or nightmares. Through the small window, she could see searchlights sweeping the yard in regular patterns. When morning came, she was escorted to the cafeteria for breakfast. The room fell silent as she entered, hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. She'd experienced hostile environments before, but this was different. These men had nothing to lose, and years of pent-up rage looking for a target. She got her tray, scrambled eggs that looked like rubber, toast that could double as a weapon, and found an empty table. Within minutes, 3 inmates had sat down across from her. The leader was a lean man with prison tattoos covering his neck and hands. "You're the new fish," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's right. Word is you're some kind of federal snitch. That true?" Zara met his gaze steadily. "Word's wrong. See, that's what they all say. But snitches got a smell to them, you know." "And you?" He leaned forward. "You smell like cop. I smell like someone who wants to eat breakfast in peace." The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Peaceful days are over, snitch. Better get used to looking over your shoulder." 300 kilometers away in Washington, D.C., Colonel James Morrison was having his own breakfast interrupted. His secure phone buzzed with a priority message from his former command staff. Staff Sergeant Richardson needed to speak with him immediately about a classified matter. Morrison stepped onto his apartment balcony before returning the call. In his business, you never knew who might be listening. "Bulldog, we got a problem," Richardson said without preamble. "It's about Zara." "What kind of problem?" "She's missing. Supposed to report to a veterans counseling appointment last week. Never showed. Her neighbor says she hasn't been home in days." Morrison frowned. Zara Kenyatta was many things, but unreliable wasn't one of them. In 15 years of service, she'd never missed a check-in, never failed to complete a mission. Maybe she took a vacation. That's what I thought. So, I did some digging. "Bulldog, she was arrested. Bank robbery. They convicted her last week." The words hit Morrison like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Zara wouldn't rob a bank if her life depended on it." "Gets worse. She was supposed to go to minimum security, but the transfer paperwork got mixed up. She's at Riverside maximum security." Morrison felt ice forming in his stomach. Riverside was where they sent cop killers and gang leaders. A woman alone in that place. "How long has she been there?" 3 days. I tried calling the facility, but they say she's in intake hold. No communication with the outside world. This stinks to high heaven. Someone wanted her buried deep. That's what I'm thinking. Question is, who and why? Morrison was already reaching for his jacket. "I'm pulling her military record. If someone's playing games with one of my people, they picked the wrong soldier to mess with." Back at Riverside, Zara was learning the prison's unwritten rules through careful observation. The white inmates clustered together in the northeast corner of the yard. The black inmates held the southeast. Hispanics controlled the basketball courts. Guards walked in pairs and kept their hands near their weapons. And everyone was watching her. During her work assignment in the laundry, she overheard 2 guards talking. Weird situation with that new fish. One said computer system shows male housing, but obviously what? Maybe she's one of them transgender types. Maybe still seems off. You see how she carries herself? Military bearing if I ever saw it. Don't matter. She's general population now. Whatever her story is, she better learn fast or she won't last the week. That afternoon, the guard who'd been mentioned in Caruso's phone call made his move. Sergeant Willis was a 20-year veteran with dead eyes and questionable loyalties. He approached Dalton Viper Hayes during yard time. "Got some intel you might find interesting," Willis said quietly. Hayes, the unofficial leader of the Brotherhood, looked up from his workout. Swastika tattoos covered his arms like a road map of hate. "I'm listening. That new fish in Block C, she's not just some bank robber. Word from upstairs is she's a federal informant. Help the feds take down some big names." Hayes's eyes lit up with predatory interest. "That's so real high-value target. Someone wants her to have an accident, if you know what I mean." "Accidents happen all the time in here," Hayes said with a smile that belonged on a shark. "Especially to snitches." As the guard walked away, Hayes was already planning. The Brotherhood had a reputation to maintain, and nothing maintained reputation like making an example of a federal rat. What none of them knew was that their target had spent years in places where the wrong move meant death, where split-second decisions separated the living from the dead. The hunters were about to discover they were stalking the most dangerous prey they'd ever encountered. The yard confrontation came on Zara's 4th day. She was walking the perimeter during recreation time, mapping sight lines and escape routes out of habit when 3 members of the Brotherhood moved to intercept her. They'd chosen their spot well, a blind corner where the guard towers couldn't see clearly. "End of the line, snitch," said the first one, a wiry man with teardrops tattooed under his eyes. His companions flanked her, cutting off retreat. Zara stopped walking and turned to face them, her hands loose at her sides. "You boys looking for something?" "Yeah," said the second attacker, cracking his knuckles. "We're looking to send a message to anyone thinking about cooperating with the feds." "Wrong person," Zara said calmly. "I'm not a snitch." The third man, built like a linebacker, laughed. "That's what they all say. But see, we got good intel that says different." They moved in unison, a coordinated attack that would have overwhelmed most victims. But Zara wasn't most victims. The moment the first man reached for her, 15 years of combat training took over. She sidestepped his lunge and drove her elbow into his solar plexus, dropping him gasping to his knees. The linebacker charged from her left. She pivoted and swept his legs, sending him crashing face first into the concrete. The third attacker hesitated for a fatal second, giving her time to grab his wrist and twist it until something popped. All 3 men were down in less than 10 seconds. "Anyone else want to discuss my cooperation with federal authorities?" Zara asked. But the yard had gone silent. Every conversation had stopped. Every basketball had stopped bouncing. Guards came running, whistles shrieking. Everyone on the ground now. Zara raised her hands and knelt slowly, but her eyes never left the crowd of inmates watching from across the yard. She could see the recognition dawning on their faces. This wasn't some helpless woman who'd gotten lucky. This was a predator disguised as prey. 2. Word of the fight spread through Riverside's communication network faster than gossip in a small town. By dinner time, every inmate in the facility knew that the new fish had dropped 3 Brotherhood members without breaking a sweat. In the maximum security wing, Hayes received the news from one of his lieutenants with barely controlled rage. 3 of our boys got taken down by some woman. Wasn't even close, Viper. She moved like she'd done it before, like professionally. Hayes slammed his fist against the concrete wall of his cell. The Brotherhood's reputation was built on fear and violence. If they couldn't handle one woman, other gangs would see it as weakness. "Double the bounty," he said, "and next time, send more than 3. Meanwhile, in the administrative wing, Warden Keir was fielding uncomfortable questions from his security chief. "Sir, we need to talk about inmate Kenyatta," Captain Rodriguez said, consulting his incident report. "This is the 3rd time this week someone's asked about her housing situation." "What about it?" "Well, she's obviously female, but the computer shows male classification. The guards are confused. Inmates are asking questions, and now she's involved in a yard fight." Keir rubbed his temples. The last thing he needed was attention from state inspectors, asking why he had a woman in general population. "What's your recommendation?" "Protective custody until we can sort out the paperwork." "No." The word came out sharper than Keir intended. He'd gotten specific instructions about Kenyatta from very important people. "She stays in Gen Pop. The computer classification stands." Rodriguez frowned. "Sir, with respect, that seems like none of your business, Captain. The woman can obviously handle herself." End of discussion. 2 states away, Colonel Morrison was discovering just how deep the rabbit hole went. The Pentagon's personnel office had been helpful until he'd mentioned Zara's name. Suddenly, files were classified, records were sealed, and everyone was too busy to take his calls. It took 3 favors and a direct call to an old friend at the Defense Intelligence Agency to get access to Zara's complete military record. What he found made his blood run cold. Staff Sergeant Zara Kenyatta hadn't just been Delta Force. She'd been one of their most decorated operators. 47 confirmed kills across 3 combat deployments. Expert marksman, hand-to-hand combat instructor, psychological warfare specialist, the kind of soldier who could disappear into hostile territory and emerge weeks later with intelligence that saved lives. But it was her final mission report that made Morrison reach for his secure phone. Operation Clean Sweep, the investigation that had exposed massive contractor fraud in Afghanistan. She'd risked her life to document evidence of systematic corruption, saving taxpayers millions and getting several defense executives prosecuted. One name on that list made his hands shake. Vincent Caruso, CEO of Blackstone Defense Solutions. "Richardson," he said when the call connected. "We need to talk in person, and we need to call in some favors." "What did you find?" Proof that someone with serious resources wanted Zara silenced. The question is whether she's still alive to rescue. Zara's new routine at Riverside was built around survival. She woke before dawn, did bodyweight exercises in her cell, and made mental notes of which guards seemed sympathetic versus which ones looked at her like she was prey. The laundry assignment kept her hands busy, but her mind alert. Industrial machinery could be weaponized if necessary. Her reputation from the yard fight had created an invisible perimeter around her during the day. Most inmates gave her space, but she could feel eyes tracking her movement, predators studying their target, looking for weaknesses. "You're making enemies fast," said Martinez, her work supervisor in the laundry. He was a lifer who had earned respect through decades of avoiding trouble. Brotherhoods got long memories and short tempers. "Thanks for the warning." Wasn't a warning. Was advice. "Maybe you should request protective custody before this gets worse." Zara folded another orange jumpsuit with mechanical precision. "Running away just delays the problem. Better to face it on my terms." Martinez shook his head. "Your funeral, lady." But the real threat wasn't coming from the Brotherhood, at least not yet. It was coming from her cellmate. That night, Zara lay on her bunk, listening to the sounds of the prison settling into darkness. Briggs was unusually quiet on the top bunk, but she could hear him shifting, restless. Her instincts, honed by years of sleeping in hostile territory, kept her in that state between sleep and wakefulness, where the slightest sound would bring her to full alertness. The sound that woke her was fabric hitting the floor. Her eyes snapped open to see Briggs standing beside her bunk, his shirt discarded, moving with the careful steps of a predator approaching prey. In the dim light filtering through their cell window, she could see the intent in his eyes. He reached for her blanket. Zara exploded into motion. Her knee drove into his solar plexus as she rolled away from his grasping hands. He doubled over, gasping, but recovered faster than she'd expected. Years of prison fights had taught him to absorb punishment. He lunged at her again, trying to pin her against the wall. The cell was too small for extended combat. Every movement was close quarters, desperate. His hands grabbed for her arms, her throat, anywhere he could establish control. Zara twisted away from his grip and drove her elbow into his temple. He staggered but kept coming, desperation, making him dangerous. When he grabbed for her again, she caught his wrist and applied pressure to the nerve cluster. His hand went numb, but he swung with his other arm. The blow caught her across the cheek, snapping her head back. But it also triggered 15 years of combat training. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a soldier under attack. She trapped his arm, used his momentum against him, and drove him face first into the concrete wall. The impact was sickeningly loud. Briggs crumpled to the floor, blood streaming from his broken nose. Officer Thompson was doing his evening rounds when he heard the commotion from cell 47. 23 years of corrections work had taught him to recognize different kinds of trouble, and this sounded like violence. He arrived to find Briggs unconscious on the floor, shirtless, and Kenyatta sitting on her bunk pulling her blanket around herself. The scene told a story he'd seen too many times before. "You okay?" Thompson asked quietly. Zara nodded, her breathing still elevated from the fight. I can see what he tried to do." Thompson's voice was grim as he looked at the evidence. "Medical emergency in cell 47, he radioed. "Need a stretcher and security backup." As the medical team worked on Briggs, Thompson made notes in his incident report. He'd been a corrections officer long enough to know attempted assault when he saw it. and Kenyatta had clearly defended herself. "You want to press charges?" he asked her. "Against who? The man who attacked me or the system that put me in a cell with him?" Thompson almost smiled at that. "Fair point. For what it's worth, you handled yourself well. Most people wouldn't have walked away from that." When Briggs regained consciousness an hour later, Thompson was waiting. "You're going to solitary," Thompson told him. "Attempted assault, 60 days minimum." "That's not what happened," Briggs protested through his bandaged nose. "She attacked me." "Funny thing about evidence," Thompson said. "Your shirt was off. She was on her bunk in defensive position. Story tells itself." As Briggs was led away to the hole, Thompson turned back to Zara. "You'll have the cell to yourself for a while. Try to get some rest." But rest was the last thing on Zara's mind. The incident with Briggs was just the opening move. She could see it in the way other inmates watched, the way certain guards avoided making eye contact. Someone was orchestrating this, turning her fellow prisoners into weapons. And tomorrow, they'd try again with better planning and more violence. 300 kilometers away, Richardson was coordinating a rescue mission that felt increasingly desperate. The bureaucratic maze protecting Zara's location seemed designed by someone who understood military protocols. Still no luck reaching her directly, he told Morrison over secure video link. "Prison says she's in administrative hold, no communication privileges." "But I found something interesting." Morrison leaned forward. "What?" "The paperwork trail for her transfer. Someone with high access altered her classification codes just hours before transport. Changed her from minimum security female housing to maximum security male housing. Computer hack. No, this was done from inside the Department of Corrections Central Office. Someone with administrative privileges made those changes manually." Morrison felt the pieces clicking together. Caruso's got people everywhere. Defense contracts mean connections throughout government. Gets worse. I tried calling her lawyer Steinberg. His office says he's been trying to locate her for a week. The DOI keeps telling him she's in transit but won't say where. They're stonewalling. Someone wants her buried so deep she disappears completely. Grim. Bulldog. If she's really at Riverside in general population, how long do you think she can last? Morrison thought about the woman he'd trained, the soldier who'd volunteered for the most dangerous assignments without hesitation. Longer than they think, but not forever. We Richardsons need to move fast. The whispers started on Zara's 6th day at Riverside. She first noticed them during her shift in the turned laundry. Conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered. Inmates exchanging meaningful glances across the workspace. Martinez avoided eye contact, suddenly finding urgent voice tasks that kept him busy. Something was building. "You hear that?" asked Thompson during evening rounds, pausing outside her cell. Zara looked up from where she sat on her bunk, her muscles still sore from the yard fight 3 days earlier. "Hear what?" "The quiet. Prison's never this quiet unless something big is coming." He was right. The usual sounds of institutional life, shouting, laughter, arguments through cell walls had been replaced by an eerie calm, like the moment before a storm when even the birds stopped singing. "Any idea what?" Thompson shook his head. "Above my pay grade, but I've been doing this 23 years, and I know when the temperature is about to spike. You watch yourself." After he left, Zara lay back on her thin mattress and felt something she hadn't experienced since her first combat deployment. Genuine fear creeping into her chest like cold water. Not the sharp adrenaline of immediate danger, but the grinding dread of knowing she was trapped in an impossible situation with no end in sight. She'd handled the yard fight, survived Briggs's attempted assault, but those were isolated incidents. This felt different, systematic, coordinated. The entire prison ecosystem was shifting around her like a predator preparing to strike. Yarko the next morning brought fragments of overheard conversation that made her blood run cold. Machine shop inventory's been going missing. Hayes called a meeting with all the shot callers. Someone's paying serious money. During breakfast, she noticed the seating arrangements had changed. Brotherhood members were scattered throughout the cafeteria instead of clustered at their usual tables, positioned to watch all exits. Other gangs that normally maintained strict territorial boundaries were sitting together, heads bent in quiet conference. The isolation was crushing. Every face she looked at held potential violence. Every conversation she couldn't hear might be planning her destruction. The cafeteria felt like a coliseum where she was the unwilling entertainment. Martinez finally approached her during the lunch break, his face grave. "They're planning something big," he said quietly, pretending to check her workstation. "Not just Brotherhood anymore. Hayes is reaching out to other factions." Zara felt ice forming in her stomach. "What kind of planning?" "The kind that ends with you in a body bag. Word is someone on the outside put serious bounty money on your head, enough to unite gangs that normally kill each other on sight." "How much money?" "6 figures. That kind of cash changes everything in here. Makes enemies into allies. Turns guards into accomplices. 6 figures. More money than most of these men would see in a lifetime. All for killing one woman." Zara's hands trembled slightly as she processed the implications. "Any timeline?" Martinez glanced around nervously. "Soon they're organizing something coordinated, not just a few guys jumping you in the yard. A full-scale operation." That night, alone in her cell with Briggs gone to solitary, Zara found herself staring at the concrete ceiling and contemplating her mortality. For the first time since her arrest, the reality of her situation hit her with crushing force. She was going to die here, not in some dramatic firefight or heroic last stand, but murdered for money by criminals who saw her as nothing more than a payday. Her body would be found in a bathroom or laundry room, another prison statistic that barely made the local news. The psychological weight was devastating. In combat, she'd always known the mission had value, that her sacrifice would serve a purpose. Here, her death would only enrich her killers and satisfy Vincent Caruso's need for revenge. She thought about her small apartment, the quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers, the simple freedom of choosing what to eat, where to go, whether to speak or remain silent. Liberties she'd never appreciated until they were stripped away. The worst part was the uncertainty. How long could she survive? Days? Weeks? Every moment of peace could be her last. Every sound in the corridor could be footsteps coming to collect the bounty on her head. Her military training had prepared her for many things, but not for this. Being hunted by hundreds of predators in a confined space with no backup, no extraction plan, no hope of rescue. The fear was becoming paralyzing. She could feel it eating away at her discipline, turning her into exactly what her enemies wanted, a victim frozen by terror. Easy prey for whoever made the first coordinated move. But alongside the fear, something else was growing. Determination. She might die in this place, but she wouldn't go quietly. If Vincent Caruso wanted her eliminated, his hired killers would have to earn their money. She began mentally cataloging everything. That could be used as a weapon, every potential escape route, every guard who seemed sympathetic. If war was coming, she'd meet it on her terms. 300 kilometers away, Colonel Morrison was working his own kind of desperation. The secure phone calls to Pentagon contacts were yielding fragments of disturbing intelligence about the depth of the conspiracy targeting Zara. The transfer paperwork was altered from inside the Department of Corrections, Richardson reported over encrypted video link. Someone with high-level access changed her classification manually just hours before transport. How high level? Assistant director or above? This isn't some low-level clerk making a mistake. This was deliberate sabotage by someone with serious authority. Morrison felt the pieces clicking together into a picture that made his blood run cold. They're not just trying to silence her. They're trying to make her disappear completely. And if she dies in that place, it'll look like prison violence. Case closed. No federal investigation. How long before we can get federal marshals involved? Richardson's face was grim on the monitor. Working on it. But these people have had years to build their network. Every agency we contact, they might have people inside. The call ended with both men understanding the terrible arithmetic of their situation. Federal bureaucracy moved slowly. Corruption moved fast. And somewhere in that concrete fortress, Zara Kenyatta was running out of time. The bathroom situation had become desperate. For 8 days, Zara had avoided using the communal facilities, relying on the small sink in her cell and rationing water to minimize her needs. But basic human biology couldn't be ignored forever, and the lack of proper hygiene was becoming unbearable. She'd been watching the patterns, timing her movements for when the bathrooms were least occupied. Early morning during the shift change seemed safest, but as she approached the washroom near Block C, every instinct screamed danger. The corridor was too quiet. In a facility housing over 1,000 men, silence meant trouble. She almost turned back, but her body's needs overrode tactical judgment. Just a quick trip, she told herself. Get in, get out, stay alert. The bathroom appeared empty when she entered. 3 stalls, a row of sinks, fluorescent lights humming overhead. She moved quickly toward the nearest stall, but the door slammed shut behind her with a metallic clang. 6 men stepped out from where they'd been hiding. Behind the door, in the stalls, pressed against the walls. Brotherhood members, but also others she didn't recognize. The bounty had created strange alliances. "Well, well," said their leader, the scarred man from the yard. "There's our payday." They spread out, blocking every exit, moving with coordinated precision. Their eyes held predatory hunger mixed with calculated greed. "Been waiting for you to show up here," said a massive man with white supremacist tattoos covering his arms. "Knew you'd have to eventually. And when you did," he smiled, showing broken teeth. "Christmas morning." "6 figures," another one said, practically salivating. "Split 6 ways. That's still more money than any of us seen in our whole lives." "Just gotta make it look right," the leader said, pulling a sharpened piece of metal from his waistband. "Prison violence happens all the time. Body gets found. Investigation goes nowhere." "I'm not who you think I am," Zara said, backing against the wall. "Don't matter who you are, sweetheart. Only matters what you're worth." His eyes traveled up and down her body with commercial interest. Though I got to say, shame to waste all that before we finished the job. The others laughed, a sound like breaking glass. One made obscene gestures, while another grabbed himself through his jumpsuit. "Might as well have some fun first," said the tattooed giant. "Dead's dead, but we got time." Zara's military training kicked in. Assess, adapt, attack. 6 attackers, confined space, weapons visible. The odds were catastrophic, but she'd faced impossible odds before. She grabbed a mop from the corner and swung it like a club. The handle caught the nearest attacker across the face, sending him stumbling backward with blood streaming from his nose. "Get her," the leader shouted. "But keep her breathing till we're done." They came at her like a pack of wolves. The first man to reach her was the tattooed giant. His fist caught her across the jaw, sending her reeling into the sink. Stars exploded across her vision, but she managed to grab the soap dispenser and swing it into his temple. He dropped hard. "That's coming out of your cut," someone yelled. But 4 men remained, and they weren't playing anymore. One pulled a weighted sock from his jumpsuit, a classic prison weapon. 2 grabbed her arms while a third drove his fist into her stomach. The air rushed out of her lungs and she doubled over, gasping. They slammed her against the wall, her head cracking against the concrete. "Hold her still," the leader said, his sharpened metal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Quick and clean. Then we collect." "Wait," said another. "Why rush? Guards won't check for 20 minutes. "Yeah," agreed a third, his voice dropping to something uglier than greed. "Been a long time since we had entertainment." His hands reached for her jumpsuit. Zara drove her knee up with desperate strength, catching him between the legs. He howled and staggered back, but the others tightened their grip. "Time's money," the leader said impatiently. "We ain't here for that. We're here for speak for yourself," interrupted the one with the weighted sock. "I say we get our money's worth." A fist caught her across the cheek, snapping her head sideways. Blood filled her mouth. Another blow to her ribs made her cry out in pain. They were arguing over her like she was already dead. "Finish it," the leader demanded. "In a minute," said another, reaching for her again. Zara twisted desperately, breaking free from one attacker's grip. She grabbed a broken piece of ceramic from the floor and slashed wildly. The makeshift weapon caught one man across the face, opening a gash from ear to mouth. But they overwhelmed her again, slamming her to the ground. Her head bounced off the tile floor, sending lightning through her skull. Strong hands pinned her arms. "Enough games," the leader said, raising his sharpened weapon. "Business is business." Then the biggest one wrapped his arm around her throat from behind, cutting off her air supply. "Make it look like a choking," he said. No stab wounds to explain. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Her lungs burned for oxygen that couldn't reach them. She clawed at his arm, but his grip was iron, professional. "Almost got her," one said, watching her struggle weaken. "Few more seconds and we're rich." The bathroom door exploded inward. "Freeze! Everybody on the ground!" Officer Thompson burst in with 3 other guards, weapons drawn, shouting commands that echoed off the tile walls. The chokehold loosened just enough for Zara to gasp precious air. The attackers scrambled away from her, hands raised, trying to look innocent. "She attacked us," the leader shouted. "We were just defending ourselves." But Thompson took one look at the scene. Zara on the floor gasping for air. 6 men standing over her with weapons and satisfied expressions, and knew exactly what he was seeing. "Medical emergency in the east bathroom," he radioed. "Need paramedics and backup now." As the other guards restrained the attackers, Thompson knelt beside Zara. She was conscious, but shaking. Dark bruises already forming around her throat. "You're safe now," he said quietly. But Zara knew better. 6 men had just tried to kill her for money, and they'd come within seconds of succeeding. Next time, there might not be anyone coming to help. "How close?" she whispered. Thompson looked at the bruises on her neck, the weapons scattered around the floor. Too close. Way too close. As the paramedics worked on her, Zara closed her eyes and tried not to think about how the chokehold had felt, how the darkness had been creeping in around the edges. The bathroom attack had shown her exactly how thin the line was between survival and death, and that line was getting thinner every day. The infirmary at Riverside was a sterile island of white tiles and antiseptic smell in an ocean of concrete brutality. Zara lay on the examination table while a nurse named Patterson cleaned the cuts on her face with practiced efficiency. "Nasty bruising around the throat," Patterson murmured, photographing each injury for the medical record. "You're lucky they didn't crush your windpipe." Lucky. Zara almost laughed at the word. Lucky would have been never ending up in this place. This was borrowed time. Nothing more. Officer Thompson stood in the doorway, his face grim as he reviewed the incident report. 6 attackers, improvised weapons, clear premeditation. This wasn't random prison violence. No. Zara agreed, her voice from the chokehold. It was business. The bounty. She nodded. Thompson had proven himself trustworthy, one of the few guards who seemed to see her as a human being rather than a problem to be managed. "Listen," Thompson said, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "I'm recommending you for protective custody, solitary confinement for your own safety. It's not pleasant, but it's better than being dead. Will Warden Keir approve it?" Thompson's hesitation told her everything. "I'm going to make the case. What happened today proves you can't survive in general population much longer." An hour later, Thompson was standing in Warden Kemper's office. The incident report clutched in his hands like evidence of institutional failure. Sir, we need to discuss inmate Kenyatta's housing situation, Thompson began. Keir didn't look up from his computer screen. What about it? 6 men just tried to murder her in a bathroom. This is the second major assault this week. She needs protective custody immediately. Protective custody is for inmates who can't handle general population. Seems to me Kenyatta handles herself just fine. Thompson couldn't believe what he was hearing. Sir, with respect, she nearly died today. If my patrol hadn't been 30 seconds earlier, but it was, and she's alive. Problem solved. Problem not solved. There's clearly a coordinated effort to eliminate her. Someone's put serious money on her head, and inmates are organizing. Finally, Keir looked up, his eyes cold and calculating. Officer Thompson, are you questioning my judgment about housing assignments in my own facility? The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Thompson had 23 years on the job, 2 kids in college, a pension he couldn't afford to lose, but he also had a conscience. I'm questioning why we're keeping a woman in general population when it's clearly a death sentence. The computer classification system assigned her to male housing based on her official records. I don't make the rules. I follow them. We both know that's garbage, sir. Someone manually altered those records. The question is why you're not fixing it. Keir stood up slowly, his face flushing red. That's enough, Officer Thompson. You're officially warned that any further insubordination regarding this matter will result in suspension pending review. Kenyatta stays in general population. End of discussion. Thompson left the office knowing he'd just signed his own career death warrant, but at least he'd tried. Meanwhile, word of the bathroom assault was spreading through Riverside's inmate communication network with the speed of wildfire. But instead of the intended intimidation, something unexpected was happening. Just ensure the operation proceeds as planned tomorrow during yard time. After hanging up, Keir stared at his reflection in the office window. 30 years in corrections had taught him to recognize when situations were spinning out of control. This felt like a free fall, but the money was too good, and he was too deep to back out now. He made the call to the guard captain authorizing the training exercise that would leave certain areas of the prison understaffed during the critical window. That evening, Zara lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, and trying to accept that tomorrow might be her last day alive. The bruises around her throat had faded to yellow-green, but she could still feel phantom hands crushing her windpipe. The mathematical reality was inescapable. Dozens of attackers, coordinated assault, no backup coming. Even with all her training, there were limits to what one person could survive. She thought about her nephew's birthday party next month, which she'd never attend. About her sister Maya, who still didn't know she'd been arrested. About all the conversations she'd never have, and the sunsets she'd never see. Most of all, she thought about Vincent Caruso sitting in his comfortable office, believing that money could buy anything, including the death of an inconvenient witness. She hoped someone would eventually make him pay for what he'd done. The sound of footsteps in the corridor broke her reverie. Officer Thompson appeared at her cell, his face grim. Heads up, he said quietly. Something's happening tomorrow. Big transfer of guards to other sections. Skeleton crew left on yard duty. Classic setup for maximum chaos. How many attackers? Intelligence suggests most of the prison. Hayes has been making deals all week. Promises of bounty money for anyone who participates. Zara nodded, unsurprised. Any word on protective custody? Thompson's silence was answer enough. Thompson, she said, when this is over, make sure people know what really happened here. Don't let them bury the truth with my body. You're not going to die tomorrow. We both know that's not true. Thompson wanted to argue, but the math was undeniable. Instead, he did something he'd never done before. He slipped her a small device through the cell bars. Emergency beacon, he whispered. If things go bad, press the button. Might not save you, but at least there'll be a record. As he walked away, Zara held the device and wondered if anyone would ever hear her final transmission. Tomorrow she would face an army of killers with nothing but her training and the slim hope that dying with dignity was still possible in a place designed to strip away human worth. But at least she would face it on her feet, fighting to the end. The night stretched ahead, possibly her last, and Zara Kenyatta prepared to meet her fate. Dawn broke gray and cold over Riverside maximum security, the kind of overcast morning that felt like an omen. Zara had slept in 20-minute intervals, her body trained to rest while her mind stayed alert for threats. The emergency beacon Thompson had given her lay hidden in her mattress, a last resort she hoped never to use. The breakfast shift felt different. Guards walked with nervous energy. Inmates moved in unusual patterns and conversations died when she passed. The entire prison ecosystem was holding its breath. "Today's the day," Martinez said as they worked side by side in the laundry. His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly as he folded jumpsuits. "Word is they're calling it Operation Cleanup." "Subtle," Zara replied, checking the clock on the wall. Yard time started in 2 hours. 2 hours before a coordinated group tried to kill her for money. "I talked to some of the older lifers," Martinez continued. "Guys who remember when the Brotherhood first took control of this place. They said they ain't never seen organization like this. Hayes got the best fighters from every major gang. How many? 15, maybe 20 inmates, all carrying improvised weapons, all with the same target. The cream of the crop. Guys who know how to handle themselves in a fight." Zara felt something cold settle in her stomach. 20 trained fighters in a coordinated assault was beyond impossible odds. It was a massacre waiting to happen. "Martine," she said quietly, "you need to stay away from the yard today. Don't get caught up in this. Thought about it. But if I'm going to watch someone die for doing the right thing, least I can do is remember her name." The words hit Zara harder than any punch she'd taken. For 10 days, she'd felt completely alone in this concrete hell. Knowing that one person would witness her last stand, would remember that she'd died fighting, meant more than she could express. Thanks was all she managed. 300 kilometers away, Colonel Morrison was coordinating the most important mission of his career from the back of a speeding SUV. Federal marshals, Pentagon investigators, and state police were converging on Riverside from multiple directions, but time was running out. "ETA to the prison," Morrison asked the driver. 90 minutes, sir. How long until yard time starts?" 2 hours. Morrison did the math and felt his blood pressure spike. They'd arrive with 30 minutes to spare. If traffic cooperated, if there were no mechanical problems, if bureaucracy moved at light speed for once in its existence. "Richardson, what's our legal status for extraction? Federal warrant signed 20 minutes ago." Richardson's voice crackled through the radio. "We have full authority to remove Kenyatta from state custody pending investigation of constitutional violations. And if the warden resists, then we arrest the warden too." Morrison allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. After 10 days of watching one of his best soldiers fight for her life, justice was finally mobilizing. The question was whether they'd reach her in time. At Riverside, Warden Keir was discovering that orchestrating a murder came with unexpected psychological costs. He sat in his office staring at security monitors that showed select inmates moving through the facility with predatory purpose, all heading toward the same objective. His secretary knocked on the door. "Sir, there's been a development. Federal marshals are requesting permission to enter the facility." Keir felt ice in his veins. When they're at the main gate now. Something about extracting a prisoner for federal investigation. The timing was catastrophically bad. In 30 minutes, Zara Kenyatta would walk into the yard where 20 of the prison's most dangerous inmates waited to kill her. If federal agents reached her first, "Stall them," Keir ordered. "Bureaucratic delays, lost paperwork, whatever it takes." "Sir, they have federal warrants. I don't care if they have presidential orders. Buy me 30 minutes. As his secretary left to delay the inevitable, Keir reached for his phone to call Caruso. This operation was spinning out of control, and someone needed to make a decision about how far they were willing to go. Sutter in the maximum security wing, Hayes was giving his final briefing to his hand-picked strike team. 20 men sat in the meeting room, the most skilled fighters from every major gang, united by the promise of substantial bounty money. "Yard time starts in 1 hour," Hayes announced. "Target will be escorted to the recreation area as usual. Once she's inside the fence, all exits get blocked." "What about guards?" asked Marcus Blade Williams from the Disciples. "Skeleton crew today. Most of them have been transferred to other duties for a training exercise. The few remaining know to look the other way. And if federal heat comes down," after Hayes smiled coldly. "Prison fight gone wrong. Happens all the time. Target got caught in the crossfire. Tragic accident. Case closed." The assembled fighters nodded agreement. 20 inmates armed with shanks, weighted socks, and improvised clubs would converge on one woman. Even with her training, the numbers were overwhelming. But what none of them knew was that their target had spent 15 years in places where the wrong decision meant death, where split-second reactions separated the living from the dead. They were about to discover that some prey fought back harder than expected. Back in her cell, Zara was making final preparations for what felt like her last battle. She'd fashioned weapons from available materials: a sharpened toothbrush handle, metal strips torn from her mattress frame, cleaning chemicals that could blind attackers. The arsenal was pathetic compared to what she'd face, but it was better than nothing. She thought about the emergency beacon hidden in her mattress. Thompson had risked his career to give her that lifeline. If things went bad, when things went bad, she'd at least leave a record of what had really happened. The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up. Officer Thompson appeared at her cell, his face grave. "Time for yard detail?" he said, but his eyes held a message. "This is it. Any last-minute changes to the schedule?" she asked, hoping against hope. "Negative. Full yard time, standard recreation period." Zara nodded and stood up. Her legs felt steady despite everything. 15 years of military service had taught her how to function under extreme stress. "Thompson," she said as they walked toward the yard, "whatever happens out there, you tried to do the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you different. You're not going to die today." "Maybe not, but if I do, make sure my sister knows I was thinking about her." They reached the entrance to the yard. Through the reinforced glass, Zara could see inmates, scattered across the recreation area in seemingly random patterns, but her trained eye recognized the deployment. Blocking positions, weapon concealment points, coordinated fields of fire. 20 killers waiting for one target. The door slid open with an electronic buzz. Beyond it lay concrete and razor wire, gray sky, and waiting death. Zara Kenyatta took a deep breath and stepped into what might be her final battlefield. Behind her, Thompson watched with growing dread as the door sealed shut. In his pocket, his radio crackled with an urgent message about federal agents at the main gate. Help was coming, but it might be 30 minutes too late. The yard at Riverside felt like a coliseum as Zara stepped onto the concrete. Gray sky pressed down like a lid, and the air hummed with anticipation. 20 inmates were scattered across the recreation area in seemingly casual positions, but her military eye recognized the tactical deployment immediately. Hayes stood near the basketball court, his scarred face wearing a satisfied smile. "Welcome to your retirement party, sweetheart." The first attack came within seconds. 2 Brotherhood members rushed her from opposite sides, a classic pincer movement designed to overwhelm through coordination. But they were thinking like street fighters, not soldiers. Zara sidestepped the first attacker's lunge and drove her elbow into his temple as he passed. The impact dropped him like a stone. The second man pulled a sharpened piece of metal, but she was already moving, grabbed his wrist, twisted until bones snapped, and watched the weapon clatter across concrete. 2 down in less than 10 seconds. "Holy shit," someone whispered. The remaining 18 circled her like wolves, their initial confidence evaporating. They'd expected a quick kill. Easy money. Instead, they were watching their targets dismantle trained fighters with surgical precision. Spread out. Hayes barked. Don't give her room to maneuver. But instead of rushing her again, they began playing a different game. They moved in slowly, forcing her to constantly turn and watch multiple angles. One would feint forward, drawing her attention, while others shifted position behind her. Getting tired yet? Called out Marcus Williams, the Disciples fighter. He held a weighted sock that could crush a skull with one swing. We got all day. Yeah, agreed another, brandishing a sharpened toothbrush. This is fun, like hunting deer. They were toying with her, she realized, letting fear build. Exhaustion set in, making her burn energy on constant vigilance. It was actually smart tactics. Use their numbers to wear her down psychologically before moving in for the kill. Come on, federal snitch, Hayes taunted. Show us what Uncle Sam taught you. Zara kept moving, kept her back to the fence when possible, conserved energy while tracking all 18 threats. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her breathing stayed controlled. Panic was luxury she couldn't afford. One attacker, a massive man with teardrops tattooed under his eyes, stepped closer than the others. Heard you was Special Forces. That true? Why don't you find out? Zara replied. He laughed and swung his improvised club in a lazy arc, not trying to hit her, but testing her reflexes. When she dodged, 2 others moved fractionally closer. They were hurting her, she realized, slowly contracting the circle, eliminating escape routes, preparing for the final rush. Professional tactics that told her someone with real training had planned this operation. You know what's funny? Hayes called out, enjoying himself now. All that training, all those missions, and you're going to die for money in a prison yard. Kind of poetic. Another feint from her left made her pivot, and she caught a glimpse of something that made her blood freeze. One of the attackers was holding what looked like a real knife, not a sharpened piece of metal, but an actual blade that had no business being in a maximum security prison. Where'd you get that? She asked. Friends in high places, the knife wielder replied. Someone really wants you dead. The circle tightened another step. 18 men, multiple weapons, nowhere to run. Even with all her training, the math was becoming impossible. At the main gate, federal marshals were discovering that bureaucracy could be weaponized as effectively as any gun. The guard at the checkpoint had been unable to locate their paperwork for 20 minutes, despite having federal warrants thrust in his face repeatedly. Sir, I understand your urgency, the guard said with practiced bureaucratic calm, but prison security protocols require. Move aside, Colonel Morrison ordered, stepping forward with military authority that could cut through red tape. We're coming through with or without your cooperation. Sir, I cannot allow unauthorized. Morrison pulled out his Pentagon identification and held it 6 in from the guard's face. I am Colonel James Morrison, United States Army Special Operations Command. The woman you're holding is one of my soldiers, and she's in immediate danger. You will open that gate now, or I will have you arrested for obstruction of justice. The guard's resolve crumbled. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. As the federal convoy rolled through the gates, Morrison checked his watch. Yard time had started 15 minutes ago. They were racing against mathematics that didn't favor survival. Back in the yard, the psychological warfare was working. Zara could feel exhaustion creeping into her muscles, fear eating at her concentration. The attackers kept moving, kept talking, kept her spinning like a cornered animal. Getting scared? Asked one. Heart beating fast, wondering if today's the day, added another. She was, and they knew it. For the first time since her arrest, genuine terror was overriding her training. Not the clean fear of combat, but the paralyzing dread of knowing she was about to die badly. Tell you what, Hayes said, his voice carrying across the yard. You got 2 choices, easy way or hard way. Easy way. You kneel down, close your eyes, and we make it quick. Hard way. He gestured to his men. We take our time. How about option 3? Zara said, though her voice sounded hollow. What's option 3? You all go to hell. Hayes laughed, genuinely amused. I like her spirit, boys. Shame to waste it. The circle contracted again. 12 feet between her and death. Then 10. Then 8. She was out of time, out of options, out of miracles. The attackers raised their weapons, no longer playing games. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading for 10 days. 20 men about to tear her apart for money while guards looked the other way. Zara Kenyatta had faced impossible odds before, but never like this. Never completely alone. Never without backup. Never with the absolute certainty that no help was coming. She reached for the emergency beacon in her pocket, hoping someone would eventually hear her final transmission. But before she could activate it, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the yard like salvation itself. Federal marshals, Pentagon investigators, and state police were storming through the prison gates with the authority to extract her from this concrete hell. The question was whether they'd reach her before 20 killers finished what Vincent Caruso had started. The circle of attackers tightened to 6 feet. Zara could see the hunger in their eyes, the anticipation of easy money mixed with bloodlust. Hayes raised his hand, preparing to give the final signal. Any last words? Federal snitch. Zara gripped the emergency beacon, her thumb hovering over the activation button. If she was going to die, at least there would be a record of what really happened here. Yeah, she said, meeting Hayes's gaze. Go. The crack of gunfire split the air like thunder. Every man in the yard froze as the sound echoed off concrete walls. Warning shots fired into the sky, but the message was unmistakable. The shots came again. 3 sharp reports that made seasoned killers duck instinctively. Federal agents, everyone on the ground now. The voice boomed across the yard through a megaphone carrying the authority of the United States government. Through the chain-link fence, Zara could see black SUVs disgorging armed federal marshals in tactical gear. What the hell? Hayes spun toward the commotion, his carefully planned execution suddenly complicated by outside interference. Hands where we can see them now. More gunshots rang out, deliberate warning shots that made even the most hardened inmates reconsider their life choices. The circle around Zara began to waver as men looked between the easy target in front of them and the federal agents storming the facility. Federal marshals shouted Marcus Williams, "Man, I ain't getting shot over no bounty money." He dropped his weighted sock and backed away, hands raised. 2 others followed his lead, then 3 more. The perfect coordination of the attack was crumbling under the weight of self-preservation. "Hold the line!" Hayes screamed. "They can't shoot us all!" But his authority was evaporating. Half his men were already backing away from Zara, unwilling to risk federal bullets for gang loyalty. The mathematics of the situation had shifted dramatically from 20 against 1 to maybe 8 diehards against federal agents with automatic weapons. Inmate Kenyatta, stay where you are. Help is coming. The voice belonged to Colonel Morrison, though Zara couldn't see him through the chaos. Hearing her former commanding officer's voice was like receiving absolution. Someone who mattered knew she was innocent, knew she didn't belong here. "You hear that?" she called to Hayes. "Game's over." But Hayes was too deep to back down now. His reputation, his power, his entire identity within the prison hierarchy depended on completing this kill. Federal agents or not, he couldn't afford to look weak. "Take her down!" he roared at his remaining men. Now, before they get through the gates, 8 men rushed her simultaneously. The last of the true believers, the ones whose loyalty to Hayes outweighed their fear of federal consequences. But the gunshots had shattered their coordination, turned their methodical attack into desperate chaos. Zara used their desperation against them. When the first attacker reached her, she grabbed his arm and used his momentum to throw him into 2 others. They went down in a tangle of limbs and improvised weapons. A sharpened piece of metal whistled past her ear as she ducked and rolled. The man wielding it overextended, giving her the opening to drive her knee into his ribs. The crack of breaking bone was audible, even over the shouting from the gates. Federal agents approaching the yard. All inmates cease hostile activity. More warning shots cracked through the air. Through the fence, Zara could see armed marshals cutting through security barriers with industrial tools. They'd be in the yard within minutes, but minutes were eternity in close combat. Hayes himself came at her with a real knife, the blade that had no business being in a maximum security prison. His face was twisted with rage and desperation, knowing that failure here meant the end of everything he'd built. "Should have taken the easy way," he snarled, slashing at her throat. Zara leaned back, feeling the blade pass inches from her jugular. She grabbed his wrist and twisted, but Hayes was stronger than the others, more experienced. He drove his knee toward her stomach while maintaining his grip on the knife. She barely avoided the blade on his backswing, the metal opening a shallow cut across her forearm. Blood began to flow, but adrenaline kept the pain at bay. "Cease hostile activity, or we will use deadly force." The federal agents had reached the yard entrance. Zara could hear bolt cutters working on the fence, see tactical gear through the chain link. Help was 30 seconds away, but Hayes wasn't giving up. He pressed his attack, using the knife with skill that spoke of years killing in confined spaces. Each slash forced Zara to give ground, to burn energy she couldn't spare. "Federal agents ain't going to save you," he panted between attacks. "Going to finish this before they get through that fence." Two of his remaining men flanked her while Hayes kept her attention focused forward. She was being cornered again, but differently this time, with the sound of approaching rescue echoing across concrete, with hope mixing poison with desperation. The fence behind the federal agents finally gave way with a screech of tortured metal. "Go, go, go!" Armed marshals poured into the yard like an avenging army, weapons raised, shouting commands that carried the full weight of federal authority. The remaining attackers scattered like roaches in sudden light, abandoning Hayes and their bounty money for the slim chance of avoiding federal charges. But Hayes kept coming, knife gleaming, his face a mask of pure hatred. He'd rather die fighting than live with the humiliation of failure. Zara could see the federal agents running toward them, but they were still 20 yards away. Hayes was 3 feet away with a knife, and he only needed one good cut to finish what Vincent Caruso had started. The blade flashed toward her heart. She caught his wrist at the last second, both hands wrapped around his arm, straining to keep the point away from vital organs. "Should have minded your own business in Afghanistan," Hayes growled, putting his full weight behind the knife. The blade inched closer to her chest. Her arms shook with the effort of holding him back. Blood from her cut arm made her grip slippery, dangerous. Then the federal agents reached them. "Drop the weapon. Drop it now." Hayes looked up to find 3 assault rifles pointed at his head. His moment of distraction was all Zara needed. She twisted his wrist until the knife clattered to the ground, then drove her elbow into his solar plexus. Hayes doubled over, gasping. Federal marshals swarmed him, weapons trained, zip-tie restraints ready. "Dalton Hayes, you're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy," announced the lead marshal. "You have the right to remain silent." As Hayes was dragged away in restraints, Zara finally allowed herself to collapse to her knees on the concrete. 10 days of hell were over. She was alive. She was free. And Vincent Caruso's carefully planned revenge had crumbled under the weight of federal justice. Colonel Morrison appeared beside her, his face a mixture of relief and fury. "Soldier," he said quietly, "let's get you out of here." The federal extraction from Riverside felt surreal after 10 days of hell. Zara sat in the back of an armored SUV, a blanket around her shoulders, and a paramedic checking her vitals, watching the prison's razor wire disappear behind them. The cut on her arm had been bandaged, but the deeper wounds would take longer to heal. "How are you feeling?" asked Colonel Morrison from the seat beside her. "Like I've been in a war zone," Zara replied, her voice from the chokehold that had nearly killed her. "Which I guess I have been."
The federal marshals arrested 23 inmates on conspiracy charges, Richardson reported from the front seat. Hayes is looking at life without parole. The others are cooperating in exchange for reduced sentences. Through the SUV's bulletproof windows, Zara watched suburban Virginia roll past strip malls, gas stations, the ordinary world that had continued existing while she'd fought for her life in concrete hell. It felt like returning from another planet. "What about the corruption investigation?" she asked. Morrison's face hardened. Vincent Caruso was arrested 2 hours ago at his corporate headquarters. The FBI seized his computers, financial records, everything. Deputy Assistant Secretary Webb is already in federal custody, singing like a canary to avoid treason charges, and Warden Kemper placed under immediate suspension pending federal review. Riverside Maximum Security is under federal oversight as of this morning. Zara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 10 days finally lifting from her shoulders. Justice wasn't just a concept anymore. It was happening right now to the people who'd tried to destroy her. The SUV pulled into the parking lot of a federal medical facility where she'd undergo a complete examination. As they walked toward the entrance, Morrison placed a hand on her shoulder. "Soldier, what you survived in there. I've seen combat veterans break under less pressure. You should be proud. I'm just grateful to be alive. You're alive because you never stopped fighting. That's what made the difference." Inside the medical facility, Zara submitted to hours of tests, photographs, and documentation. Every bruise was catalogued, every cut measured, every trauma recorded for the federal case building against her attackers. The clinical process helped her begin separating from the animal survival mode that had kept her alive. Dr. Sarah Chen, the facility's chief psychiatrist, conducted the psychological evaluation with gentle professionalism. "What you experienced was extreme trauma," she explained. "It's normal to feel disconnected, hypervigilant, angry. These reactions don't make you weak. They make you human. How long before I feel normal again? There's no timeline for healing, but I can tell you that survivors who channel their experience into purpose often find the strongest recovery paths." That evening, Zara sat in a secure hotel room, her first privacy in 10 days, and called her sister Maya for the first time since her arrest. "Zara, oh my God, where have you been? I've been calling and calling Maya. I need to tell you something, and you need to sit down." The conversation lasted 2 hours. Maya cried, raged, demanded to know how such things were possible in America. By the end, she was making plans to fly to Virginia immediately. "I should have known something was wrong," Maya said through tears. "You would never just disappear without telling me. You couldn't have known. No one could have predicted this. But I'm your sister. I should have. Maya, listen to me. What happened wasn't anyone's fault except the people who orchestrated it. Don't carry guilt that belongs to Vincent Caruso." 3 weeks later, Vincent Caruso sat in federal detention awaiting trial, his empire in ruins and his daughter refusing to take his calls. The defense contractor who'd once commanded respect in Pentagon hallways was now just another inmate in an orange jumpsuit. District Attorney Richard Brennan had resigned in disgrace. His political career ended by corruption charges that would likely send him to prison. The election he'd been so desperate to win was now academic. His name had been removed from the ballot entirely. Judge Patricia Holmes faced federal investigation for her role in the conspiracy, though early indications suggested she'd been coerced rather than complicit. The investigation would determine whether her judicial career survived. At Riverside Maximum Security, A new warden implemented sweeping reforms under federal oversight. Officer Thompson had been promoted to assistant warden, his integrity during the crisis earning recognition rather than punishment. The facility's classification system underwent complete overhaul to prevent future errors like Zara's. Hayes and his remaining followers faced additional federal charges that would keep them in isolation for decades. The bounty system that had turned the prison into a hunting ground was dismantled, its financial backers facing their own prosecutions. Sakiki, 6 months later, Zara Kenyatta stood at the podium in the Hart Senate Office building, facing a packed committee room and television cameras that would broadcast her testimony across the nation. The burgundy suit felt strange after weeks of orange jumpsuits, but the confidence in her voice was unmistakable. Senator Williams, the corruption I witnessed goes far beyond one defense contractor seeking revenge, she said, her words carrying the weight of someone who'd survived hell to speak truth. This was a systematic abuse of our justice system, turning courts and prisons into weapons against inconvenient witnesses. Senator Williams leaned forward, his expression grave. Ms. Kenyatta, in your opinion, how widespread is this type of corruption? Widespread enough that I nearly died for exposing it if Colonel Morrison and Staff Sergeant Richardson hadn't acted when they did? She paused, letting the implications hang in the air. Vincent Caruso would have succeeded in silencing me permanently. In the gallery, Morrison watched with pride as his former soldier delivered testimony that was dismantling decades of carefully constructed corruption. Beside him, Richardson took notes for the Pentagon's own investigation into compromised personnel. After the hearing, Zara walked through the corridors of power with a different perspective than she'd had as a soldier. Power could corrupt, but it could also serve justice when guided by people of conscience. That evening, Zara stood in the backyard of her sister Maya's house in suburban Virginia, watching her nephew's birthday party wind down. Children ran across the grass, while adults cleaned up paper plates and deflated balloons. The mundane domestic scene more beautiful than any sunset she'd witnessed overseas. Aunt Zara, her nephew called out, running up with chocolate cake smeared across his face. Will you tell us another story about the army? Maybe tomorrow, buddy. Tonight's for celebrating. Maya approached with a knowing smile. He's been asking about your stories every day since you got back. I think you've got a new mission, inspiring the next generation. The next generation doesn't need to learn about war, Zara replied. They need to learn about justice, about doing what's right, even when it's hard. Is that what you're planning to do with the training center? Zara nodded. The settlement from her federal lawsuit against the Department of Corrections had provided enough funding to establish something unprecedented. A facility that trained survivors of institutional violence in self-defense, while providing legal advocacy for others trapped in similar situations. First class starts next month, she said. 15 women who've been failed by the system but refuse to stay victims. And the name Zara smiled, watching her nephew chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The Kenyatta Institute for Justice and Resilience has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Maya hugged her sister, both women understanding how close they'd come to losing each other forever. I think it's perfect. As darkness settled over the suburban neighborhood, Zara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the temporary quiet between missions, but the deep satisfaction of knowing her skills would now serve protection rather than destruction. Vincent Caruso had tried to bury her in concrete and corruption, but instead, he'd forged something stronger. The woman who emerged from Riverside Maximum Security wasn't the same soldier who'd been arrested in a grocery store parking lot. She was something new, a warrior for justice who understood that the most important battles weren't fought with weapons, but with truth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Morrison. "Proud of you, soldier. Seer fee," Zara typed back. "Mission accomplished, sir. Ready for the next one." But this time, the mission would be her own, and she would make sure no one else ever had to face what she'd survived alone. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.